Game keycards continue to plague the conversation surrounding the Nintendo Switch 2, and it really is a damn shame because people really thought that Nintendo was one of the last bastions of taking games preservation and physical media seriously, with Switch 2 continuing to use cartridges, but then they introduced the concept of game keycards, which you can see right here, a summary that basically describes this as physical media that requires a digital download. It is physical media that doesn't have all the game data in it. The card itself just serves as a key to access the downloaded digital product, but the card itself does not contain the necessary files to play the game. So you might as well just buy the game digitally, as that at least offers the convenience of not having to carry around physical media, with the only advantage being the ability to lend the game to somebody. But as far as like keeping the game forever and feeling like you own the game is concerned, none of that is present here. And it goes without saying that people are really not fans of that, especially enthusiasts and, gamers who are really into the hobby, who understand the importance of games preservation and how physical media ultimately empowers that. So many launch titles on the Nintendo Switch 2 and so many upcoming releases will be game keycards. You can see right here one list among many that you'll find online. Now, Nintendo is releasing all of their games in regular game cards. All of the first-party releases so far have all been housed within the physical media, including the most recent Donkey Kong Bonanza, and a handful of third-party games, particularly the Switch 2 edition stuff, is coming out on regular game cards, and CD Projekt itself is an exception in that they managed to fit the massive game that is Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition, which includes the DLC, in a full game card and not made it a game key card. But that aside, the vast majority of third-party games are game key cards, which is really disappointing to see. And look, this is nothing new. A lot of physical versions of games these days don't house all of the game data, and you've got companies like Ubisoft in particular who release physical editions of games and still require essentially a download, a little patch that serves as a key to unlock the game. So it renders the physical media useless in the form that you would anticipate it to be in. But seeing how prominent proper physical media was on the Nintendo Switch 1 and seeing this transition towards game key cards and giving that option to publishers to essentially give players the short end of the stick as far as physical media is concerned, it's just really unfortunate. And it's only going to further fuel the bad habit that the games industry has of not preserving games and not giving players a certain sense of ownership over the media that they own. And the unfortunate thing is that even months after launch, game key cards continue to plague the third-party scene. But before we get to that, speaking of bad habits, that brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Fume, a company dedicated to helping people transition out of and replace habits like vaping and similar activities with a harmless alternative. This is an innovative, award-winning device that imitates the motions and actions of bad habits akin to a placebo while taking out all of the bad elements, such as the inhalation of unhealthy chemicals, instead offering delicious, naturally flavored scents. There are no vapors or electronics involved here. This is not an e-cig, vape, or nicotine device. Just breathe in natural air that passes through the flavored cores made from plant compounds and taste something refreshing while performing actions that will scratch the itch of the hand-to-mouth fixation. There are plenty of flavors to choose from to suit your preferences. Most recently, I tried out this cranberry flavor, which offered a more subtle scent with just the right amount of fruitiness that made for a really pleasant experience. There was no coughing or irritation, just natural air that was scented with a really good taste. The device itself has a nice weighted premium feel to it with its combination of high quality wood and metal, with components held together by magnets, and the metal part itself rotates to adjust the amount of airflow, which is also a great way for fidgeters to keep their fingers busy. Switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun, which is why over 500,000 customers have made the change with tons of success stories, with even doctors having backed the device. If breaking away from destructive habits is a priority, you can pick up the Journey Pack today by heading to tryfume.com/yongyeah or scanning the QR code and using the code YONGYEAH. If you use my link and code, you get the topper accessories, which help soften and protect the tip of the device for free. All right, so let's talk about ways in which the game keycard format continues to plague the conversation surrounding the Nintendo Switch 2, starting with the recent Nintendo Direct Partner Showcase from July 31st, 2025. This was focused on third-party releases, and as you might have guessed, a lot of these releases in the physical format will be in the form of game key cards. In fact, there are plenty of articles highlighting how fans felt severely underwhelmed and disappointed at the number of games showcased that will be game key cards, and plenty of posts on social media like this right here from Genki saying Nintendo Game Key Card Partner Showcase, highlighting how many of the highly anticipated third-party games and ports for the Nintendo Switch 2, like Octopath Traveler 0, Persona 3 Reload, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and Pac-Man World Repack 2, are all going to be housed in game key cards that defeat the whole purpose of physical media for the most part. And what's strange about these games in particular, as Genki highlights here, is that all of them are under 64 gigabytes, so they can fit in the card. Like, it'd be one thing if these game files were so big that they just literally cannot fit in a regular game card, but these absolutely can. And so it makes this decision that spits in the face of physical media enthusiasts just all the more baffling and all the more disappointing. I mean, when Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition can be all fit into a 64 gigabyte game card, there is no excuse for games like these to not be able to do the same, given that that is a much less complicated process, as these game files are not as big as Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition. If CD Projekt is capable of pulling this off, then so can all these third-party entities. Now, what it all ultimately comes down to is this being a cost-cutting measure. As Daniel Ahmad explains here, 64 gigabyte game cards are significantly more expensive than discs for game makers, so you have to price games above 60. It's just cheaper for game companies to release games digitally and to put their games in the game key cards that are not high capacity, high storage, and cheapen out that way just to be able to have better margins for each game sale. But my counter argument to that is that you should just price the physical editions at a higher price point to make up for that difference, to make up for the lower margins. Like, I'm willing to pay a little extra to make up for that cost if it means that I get to own an object that I can just insert, plug, and play. Obviously, there's going to be patches and stuff to download, but as long as there's some version of the game that I can play from that cartridge without having to depend on service providers, being up and running and having the required patches to be able to run the game, as long as I can run the game in some way, shape, or form through a physical media that I own, I'll be satisfied. And so having that option to pay a little more for a full-fledged game card for games, to me, that would be an ideal solution. But in general, regular game cards are just more of a hassle for companies, so they want to go the easiest route possible with the least friction. Now, if you're going to go this route, at the very least, be honest about why you're going this route of game key cards. There's some companies trying to justify this as this being good for players, which is just factually and decidedly not true. So among companies putting out a statement about game key cards is NIS America, speaking about Trails Beyond the Horizon for the Nintendo Switch 2, which will be a game key card release. That's been confirmed. And when asked about why they felt the necessity to go this route, why they didn't just put the game in a regular game card, they said the following. A representative, at least, responded with the following statement. We decided to release this title as a game key card on the Nintendo Switch 2 as we believe it was the most beneficial option for our customers. Explain yourself. The physical media requires you to download, which means that when you get the game, you have to spend additional time actually downloading the game before you can dive into it. It's going to take up more storage on your already limited internal storage on your Nintendo Switch 2. You can opt to get a microSD card express, but those right now are really hard to get. They're selling out like crazy, especially the higher storage capacity microSD card expresses. Those are selling out. So storage right now especially is really limited, and so the download requirement means that taking up that extra storage space will be an inconvenience. And then, of course, there's the element of you get none of the benefits of physical media, where you get to insert the game card and play the game right there and then, and have a sense of autonomy over the product that you bought. That, this is something they cannot take away from you because it's in physical format. You're not dependent on the service providers to maintain servers and to keep them running. Game key cards are actually the least beneficial option for customers. They're the worst of both worlds. It's a digital product that still requires the inconvenience of carrying around a physical object that you have to insert into your console, and it's a physical product that requires you to download all of the game data and is still dependent on servers being maintained for you to have ownership over that game. So I don't know where they're getting this idea that game key cards are the most beneficial option for customers. That is a statement that isn't elaborated upon, which means that on some level they know that this is just, an empty statement. And another area where game key cards have plagued the Nintendo Switch 2 scene is in the way that they're not allowing for Switch 1 versions to be upgraded to Switch 2, and in the way that there's a separation between the physical editions of Switch 1 versions of games and Switch 2 versions of games. As highlighted in scenarios like Octopath Zero here, where in the Nintendo Switch 1 version of the physical media, it is a regular game card where all the game data is housed within the physical media, but the Nintendo Switch 2 version is a game key card. And so what enthusiasts were hoping for is that they could get the Switch 1 version of the game and get a proper physical media and then have an upgrade path towards the Switch 2 version. While it's still not the most ideal way because you still have to download something to get the Switch 2 upgrades, at least you have some kind of physical media that you can use to play the entire game from the game cartridge itself and not be dependent on other companies to have some kind of playable form of the title. But that is something that is not being offered by companies who are releasing their games both on Switch 1 and Switch 2. So, for example, Square Enix confirmed right here that it is not possible to upgrade from the Switch 1 version to the Switch 2 version once purchased. There are also no plans for an option to upgrade to Switch 2 version in the future. Please make sure you purchase the correct version, which means that if you purchase the Switch 1 version of the game, you are stuck with the lower resolution, the lower performance of the Switch 1 edition. Even if you play it on the Nintendo Switch 2, you do get the physical media, but you're essentially left with a version of the game that doesn't take advantage of the new hardware. And if you get the Switch 2 version, you do get all the enhancements and upgrades that the Switch 2 version features, but you don't get all the game files in the cartridge. You get that game key card. So there's no option to get both. There's this separation that feels woefully unnecessary to me. And the same applies for Trails Beyond the Horizon. Fans were hoping that wouldn't be the case, but Nintendo Life asked NIS America if there is a possibility to upgrade from the Switch 1 version to the Switch 2 version, because like Octopath Traveler Zero, Trails Beyond the Horizon has a Switch 1 version that is a regular game card and a Switch 2 version that is a game key card. But NIS America was unable to confirm whether Trails Beyond the Horizon will have a Switch 1 to Switch 2 upgrade path. Now, this is not them shutting down the possibility entirely, but this is not something they're actively working on either. And I would bet that it's not something they're going to ultimately implement. I think there is going to be that separation between the Switch 1 physical edition and the Switch 2 physical edition with this title as well. And you got a similar situation with Sonic Shadow Generations, as posted here by Speeding in the Mania, where they report how it's been confirmed that this is a game keycard title for the Nintendo Switch 2, and it's not upgradable from the Switch 1 version, whose physical media does house the full game files inside the cartridge. It reads right here, "Give us a free upgrade patch, Sega, for those who bought this game not even a year ago. Let them know this isn't acceptable." So that's another area where game keycards are being criticized, where Switch 1 versions of those games can house all the game data inside the cartridge, but with a Switch 2 version, they opted for game keycards, and that separation means that upgrade paths are really limited. And so as more time goes by, the detriments of game keycards are becoming more glaringly obvious. And it's something that numerous entities have spoken out about, including, CEOs of game companies. So right here we have Stephen Kick, CEO of remaster specialist Night Dive Studios, who said, speaking to GamesIndustry.biz, "Seeing Nintendo do this is a little disheartening in regards to game keycards. You would hope that a company that big that has such a storied history would take preservation a little more seriously." Even shareholders brought up concerns during a recent shareholders meeting, as reported here by GamesIndustry.biz. The article reports that shareholders also expressed apprehension regarding game keycards, and Nintendo's response, specifically Furukawa, the CEO, said that they're continuing to work closely with publishers to support the various distribution methods offered on the Nintendo Switch 2, which is a very non-answer. That doesn't say anything about all the concerns surrounding that format. And he continues, "This is one of the new software distribution methods we've introduced to accommodate the larger game data sizes on Switch 2 compared to Switch. Except game companies who are releasing games whose game data sizes aren't even that big are still using that method just to cheapen out on the physical media side of things, while screwing over customers when it comes to what the expectations are and what the advantages are of physical media, and leaving them with, again, the worst of both worlds, the worst parts of physical media and the worst parts of digital media." And then they conclude with, "Software can be released in various formats and will continue to work closely with software publishers on many fronts to ensure that they actively support our platform." So again, it's a very empty statement that basically says we're going to keep doing what we're doing, and game key cards basically will remain. Like, this is not something that Nintendo seems to intend to discontinue as a format. Now, some folks are saying that there might be some hope in the way that Nintendo has been sending out surveys about game key cards. And in those surveys, I've sent out 2 already. They do ask about specifically game key cards and physical media that require digital downloads. They basically ask here how much that influences your purchase decision. And the hope is that the vast majority of people who took the survey picked definitely would not buy, in the hopes that Nintendo gets the message, but also the general masses don't really care because there's a lack of awareness of the advantages and disadvantages, the pros and cons between, proper physical media and digital media, and then that in between of game key cards, and the way that gives you, again, the worst of both worlds. And so long as the masses just continue buying this stuff and none of this ultimately ends up being financially detrimental to Nintendo, as long as it continues to be an enthusiast issue, enthusiasts being like in the, minority of the general mass population, I get the sense that as long as Nintendo doesn't feel like they have an obligation or that it's impacting the company and the shareholders negatively, they'll just keep doing this, what is, for lack of better words, an anti-consumer practice, because they know they can get away with it, and because it's convenient, and because they don't really seem to care that much about the issue of games preservation and the idea of people feeling a semblance of ownership over the product that they purchased. Having access to the products that they bought for as long as they take care of the products that they bought. I guess only time will tell how this game key card situation will proceed moving forward. I get the sense that we're transitioning further and further into a fully digital era, and we have seen the consequences of that already, with plenty of games having just completely disappeared from the face of the planet, and with movements like Stop Killing Games, which recently garnered a lot of traction and seems to be doing really well and seems to be headed towards legislation, being there to essentially warn and to essentially create rules and laws that will allow the prevention of not only the loss of games on a permanent level, but also, respecting the basic concept of commerce, where when you spend money on a product, you should have autonomy over your ability to access that product and use that product. And so we'll see how all of this will play out as time passes. But so far, game key cards have proven to be woefully unpopular among enthusiasts, and the disadvantages of that format continue to reveal themselves as more time passes. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Nintendo Switch 2 game key cards. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.